Cowboy, is your mind always between my legs? Is that why you look so lost out here? Clara had never expected her life to turn out like this. Just a few months ago, she had lived in the bustling city, surrounded by the constant hum of cars, flashing lights, and the endless rush of people. It had been exciting, yes, but also exhausting. Her days were filled with deadlines and meetings, and her nights often went by in a blur of noise and crowded apartments. She had needed a change, a place where she could breathe, think, and finally feel like herself again. The countryside she had chosen was nothing like the city. Endless plains stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with small farms, wooden barns, and dusty dirt roads. The air smelled fresh, tinged with grass, soil, and something else she couldn't quite name, something she liked. Life here moved slowly, deliberately. People greeted each other on the street, doors were rarely locked, and the sun seemed to rise and set on its own schedule. Clara had fallen in love with the simplicity of it all, but she also quickly realized that this kind of life came with its own challenges. Her small rented cabin sat on the edge of a ranch, and from her front porch, she could see the vast fields where cattle roamed and the horizon melted into soft hills. She had taken on a few jobs around town to keep herself busy, helping at the local general store and assisting with small farm tasks. But what she hadn't expected was to meet him, Jake. The first time Clara saw him, he was standing near a corral, hands gripping the wooden fence, staring out into the distance with a face so thoughtful that it almost seemed lost. He had the rugged look of someone who had spent years under the sun, with wind-tangled hair and sun-kissed skin. His jeans were worn, his boots dusty, and there was a faint stiffness to the way he carried himself, as if his body had grown used to long hours of labor. Clara had stopped mid-step, curious. She had seen plenty of men in town, but there was something about this one that made her pause. Perhaps it was the way he seemed disconnected from everything around him, or maybe it was the way his eyes carried stories he hadn't yet shared. "Well, Cowboy," Clara called out, her voice teasing but friendly. She had learned that humor was often the easiest way to break the ice. "Is your mind always somewhere far away, or is it just today that you look so lost?" Jake blinked and turned toward her, a faint blush creeping onto his cheeks. He wasn't used to strangers, especially women, speaking to him so directly. He opened his mouth, probably to respond, but no words came out at first. Instead, he let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. "I guess I was just thinking," he said finally, his voice rough but calm. Clara smiled, taking a few steps closer. She didn't know why, but she felt drawn to him, as though there was a puzzle she wanted to figure out. "About what?" she asked, curiosity sparkling in her eyes. Jake looked back out at the plains, hesitating. "Stuff," he muttered, almost shyly. He wasn't used to sharing much with strangers, but something about Clara made it feel safe, interesting even. "Well, stuff is awfully vague," Clara said, tilting her head. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world out here, or maybe just lost in your own head." She laughed softly, not to mock him, but to lighten the tension. Jake finally looked at her fully, meeting her eyes. There was a mixture of amusement and caution there. He wasn't accustomed to women teasing him like this, not in a way that felt friendly rather than flirtatious. "Maybe a little of both," he admitted, a small smile breaking through. From that moment, Clara found herself watching him more often. She noticed how he would sometimes wander along the dirt paths alone, feeding the horses or checking fences, but always with a distant look in his eyes. She wondered what he was thinking about, and slowly she began to imagine stories for him, even though she didn't know him at all. Days passed, and their paths continued to cross. Clara had taken to greeting him whenever she could, and Jake had slowly started to respond, initially with awkward smiles and then with small conversations. Sometimes they talked about the weather, the state of the crops, or the livestock. Other times they just shared silence, sitting on the porch of the barn or leaning against a fence, letting the wind and sunlight fill the space between words. One afternoon, Clara decided to approach him while he was mending a fence. She carried a small bottle of water and some snacks she had prepared, walking briskly over the uneven ground. "You need a break, Cowboy," she said, offering him the bottle. "You look like you haven't had a drink all day." Jake hesitated, then accepted it with a grateful nod. "Thanks," he said, taking a long swallow. "I guess I did get a little carried away." Clara laughed, shaking her head. "A little. You've been out here since sunrise." "I know," Jake admitted. I like the quiet, helps me think." Clara leaned against the fence beside him, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. "Thinking is fine," she said gently, "but sometimes getting lost in your thoughts means you forget to live a little too." Jake looked at her, studying her face. There was something in her tone, caring but not patronizing, that made him pause. He had spent so long focused on responsibilities, chores, and the pressure of being reliable that he had almost forgotten what it meant to just enjoy a moment. "You're not wrong," he said finally, his voice quieter than before. Over the next few weeks, Clara found herself drawn into Jake's world. She learned the rhythms of the ranch, the early mornings, the sound of the horses' hooves, the smell of hay and leather, and the occasional bursts of chaos when a cow went astray. And she watched Jake, quiet and thoughtful, but capable and skilled in ways that made her admire him more with each passing day. Yet, despite all she observed, he remained mysterious. He rarely spoke of his past or his family. He seemed to carry a weight that he didn't share with anyone. And yet, every now and then, there were glimpses of something softer, a spark of humor or a hint of longing that made Clara want to know more. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, Clara decided to sit beside him on a hill overlooking the ranch. They had been talking about nothing in particular, just the beauty of the evening and the strange calm that settled over the land. "You ever wonder what it would be like to just leave all this behind?" she asked suddenly. Jake didn't answer immediately. He watched the horizon, the way the sunlight shimmered off the distant fields. "Sometimes," he said finally. "But then I remember why I'm here. Family, work, things that matter." Clara nodded, understanding. "I get that, but it's nice to think about possibilities too, isn't it?" He looked at her, and for the first time he let himself smile fully. "Yeah, it is." From that day on, their bond grew, not in the dramatic ways one might expect, but slowly, through shared moments and quiet conversations. Clara began to understand Jake, not just as the rugged cowboy who wandered the plains, but as someone with hopes, fears, and dreams hidden beneath the surface. And Jake, in turn, found himself looking forward to Clara's presence, her voice, and the way she seemed to see him, not just his work or his quiet demeanor, but the real person inside. It wasn't a love story yet, not in the traditional sense. But it was something else, something rare, connection. In a world that often felt too large, too fast, too lonely, they had found a rhythm together, a shared space where they could just be themselves. And for Clara, that was enough. For now, to keep her returning to the hill, to the barn, and to the quiet companionship of the man who seemed so lost, yet was slowly finding his way. As the first part of her story in this new town came to a close, Clara realized something important. Life out here wasn't about rushing or achieving or proving anything. It was about noticing the small moments, the laughter, the teasing, the quiet pauses that held so much meaning. And with Jake, she had discovered that even a lost mind could find clarity slowly, with the right company. And maybe, just maybe, she thought with a small smile, that lost mind might lead to something she hadn't expected at all. The weeks passed quickly, though time in the countryside always seemed to stretch and shrink in strange ways. Clara had grown accustomed to her new routine, rising early with the sun, helping at the general store, and wandering through the open fields whenever she had a free moment. But more than anything, she had grown accustomed to seeing Jake, sometimes by chance, sometimes deliberately, but always in ways that felt like the world was quietly nudging them together. It was a warm morning when Clara first noticed him struggling with a stubborn gate on the edge of his property. The wood was old and splintered, the hinges creaking with every movement. He had been at it for nearly an hour, sweat on his brow, muscles tense with frustration. Clara hesitated for a moment, then decided to step in. "Need a hand?" she called from a few feet away, trying to sound casual. Jake looked up, startled. For a moment, his surprise was almost comical, as if he hadn't expected anyone to notice him at all. Then he smiled faintly, brushing his hands on his jeans. "I'm fine, but thanks," he said. Clara didn't move closer at first, just watched him for a moment. "You don't have to do everything alone, you know," she said. "Even cowboys need help sometimes." Jake chuckled softly. "Guess I've just gotten used to it," he admitted. "Used to figuring things out by myself." Clara shrugged lightly. "Well, even the best cowboys can't fix a gate by themselves forever. Mind if I help?" There was a pause, a moment where Jake studied her. Then he nodded, stepping aside to let her examine the gate. "All right," he said. "Be my guest." Together they worked on the gate, laughing at their mistakes and small failures. Clara was surprised by how easy it was to talk to him when they were doing something physical. Words flowed naturally, punctuated by small jokes and shared observations. She learned that Jake had a dry sense of humor, subtle but sharp, and that beneath his quiet exterior, he was patient and clever in ways that weren't immediately obvious. By the time the gate finally stood firm and secure, they were both slightly out of breath, cheeks flushed from the morning sun. Clara leaned against the wooden frame, smiling. "See, much easier with two people." Jake nodded, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Yeah. I'll admit it, you make a good partner." Clara laughed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll take that as a compliment." From that morning onward, their encounters became more frequent and intentional. Clara began helping Jake with small tasks around the ranch, from feeding the animals to repairing fences. At first, Jake was hesitant to involve her in anything too complicated, but he slowly realized that she was capable, careful, and even a little adventurous. And Clara, in turn, found that she enjoyed the work, even when it was hard or messy. There was a sense of satisfaction in seeing results from effort, in feeling the sun on her face, the wind in her hair, and the earth beneath her hands. One afternoon, they were walking along a narrow dirt path that wound between two large fields. Clara carried a small basket of tools, while Jake led a stubborn horse that had refused to cooperate during training. "You know," Clara said casually, "I didn't expect life here to be so busy." Jake looked at her, eyebrow raised. "Busy compared to the city?" "No," Clara admitted with a small laugh. "Compared to how I thought it would be. I imagined quiet mornings, endless walks, and, well, not much else. But it turns out there's always something to do." Jake smiled knowingly. "Yeah, there's always something, but it's different here. You notice things, you notice people, even the quiet moments matter." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "I like that," she said softly. "I really do." For the first time, Jake allowed himself to share a little more. "Sometimes it's hard," he admitted, watching the horse as it finally obeyed his gentle commands. "People think being a cowboy is all riding and adventure, but there's responsibility too, always responsibility, and sometimes it feels heavy." Clara glanced at him, sensing the weight in his words. "I get that," she said. "It's the same with anything that matters. The important things never come easy." Jake looked at her, and for a moment there was a quiet understanding between them. It wasn't friendship exactly, not yet, and not romance either, but a recognition that they could talk openly without judgment, without pretense. Clara felt a warmth inside her chest, a mix of curiosity and admiration for this man who seemed so strong, yet quietly burdened. Days turned into weeks, and Clara began noticing more subtle aspects of Jake's character. He had habits she found endearing. The way he always straightened a chair before sitting, the care he took with the animals, the slight hesitation before he spoke when he was unsure of how to express himself. And she noticed something else. Despite his calm exterior, there were moments when his mind wandered, when he looked out over the plains with a distant, almost melancholy expression. One evening, as the sky turned shades of purple and gold, Clara and Jake found themselves sitting near the edge of a small pond on his property. The water reflected the fading light, and the breeze carried the soft scent of wildflowers. They were both quiet at first, listening to the gentle sounds of nature. "You ever wonder if you're meant for more than this?" Clara asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Jake considered the question, eyes on the water. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But then I think about why I'm here and it makes sense. This is home, these fields, these animals, they matter." Clara nodded. "I know what you mean, but it's nice to dream too, isn't it? To imagine something bigger even if it doesn't happen." Jake smiled faintly. "Yeah. I suppose it is." From that day on, Clara began noticing small changes in him. He laughed more often, though still quietly. He seemed less distracted, more present when she was around. And sometimes, when she caught him looking at her with those thoughtful eyes, she felt a connection that went beyond simple friendship. But it wasn't just about Jake. Clara herself was changing too. Life in the countryside, with its rhythm and simplicity, had taught her patience, observation, and appreciation for the little things. She began to understand that connection wasn't something to rush. It was something to nurture slowly, through shared experiences, laughter, and even silence. One morning, as they repaired a section of fence together, a sudden gust of wind blew dust and hay into their faces. Clara laughed, ducking instinctively, while Jake shook his head, trying to clear the mess from his eyes. "You always seem to find trouble, don't you?" he said, a teasing note in his voice. Clara grinned, wiping her hands on her pants. Or maybe trouble finds me, she replied. Either way, it seems we make a good team. Jake's smile grew genuine and warm. That we do, he agreed. Over time, their bond deepened. They shared meals, stories of their pasts, and dreams for the future, though Jake was careful to keep some things private. Clara respected that, understanding that trust wasn't something that could be forced. It had to grow naturally, and she was patient enough to let it. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the barn, watching the sun set behind the distant hills. Clara turned to Jake, curiosity in her eyes. Do you ever regret staying here? She asked softly. Jake shook his head slowly. No, not really. It's challenging, yes, sometimes lonely, but it's home, and I like the work, the land, the life I have here. I just didn't expect to meet someone like you, Clara smiled, feeling her heart lift. I didn't expect to meet you either, she admitted, but I'm glad I did. For the first time, there was a moment of quiet understanding between them, a recognition that their connection was growing into something meaningful. It wasn't about rushing or forcing feelings. It was about presence, care, and shared moments that built trust over time. As part 2 of Clara and Jake's story came to a close, both of them felt a subtle shift. They weren't yet lovers, nor even best friends, but something else, something rare and precious. A bond formed through observation, understanding, and gentle companionship. And in the wide, open plains of the countryside, where life moved slowly and deliberately, they were discovering that connection could bloom quietly, steadily, and beautifully, one shared moment at a time. The early mornings had begun to feel comforting to Clara. There was something peaceful about waking up to the soft light spilling over the plains, the distant lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Each day brought with it new chores, small challenges, and opportunities for Clara and Jake to spend time together. She was learning the rhythms of ranch life, but more than that, she was learning the quiet language of companionship. It was a particularly warm afternoon when Clara decided to help Jake with a small project he had been putting off for weeks. A section of the barn roof needed repair, and though Jake was capable, he had been hesitating, worried about working alone in the heat. Clara arrived with a bundle of tools, smiling as she called out, "You look like you could use a hand today." Jake glanced up, his expression softening. "You're right, I probably could," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. They worked side by side, passing tools back and forth, measuring and hammering, laughing at their small mistakes and sharing stories to make the task less tedious. Clara noticed how focused Jake became when he was working, his brow furrowed, hands steady and precise. It was different from the distracted, wandering expression he often carried. Here he was fully present, yet still quietly aware of her presence beside him. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead and laughed. "I didn't realize working on a roof could be so exhausting," Jake chuckled softly. "You get used to it," he replied. "Eventually, but it's worth it when the job's done." Clara smiled, feeling a quiet admiration for the man beside her. She noticed the way his muscles moved, the careful way he handled each nail and board, and the patience that underlay everything he did. It wasn't just strength. It was thoughtfulness, awareness, and a quiet dedication that spoke louder than words ever could. Later that evening, after the barn project was complete, they sat on the porch steps, drinking water and watching the sun sink behind the hills. The sky was painted with colors that seemed almost impossible, shades of orange, pink, and deep purple blending together, reflecting off the pond nearby. Clara felt a sense of calm wash over her. Life here, she realized, was different. Slower, yes, but richer in ways that city life could never provide. Jake turned to her, a faint smile on his face. "You've been helping a lot lately," he said quietly. Clara shrugged, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I like it. And well, I like being around you." She paused, unsure if she had revealed too much, but the honesty in her words felt necessary. Jake looked at her, his expression softening. "I'm glad," he said. I enjoy it too." The days continued in much the same way, simple, meaningful, and filled with small moments of connection. Clara learned more about Jake, discovering the depth of his care for the animals, his respect for the land, and the quiet strength he carried in his responsibilities. But she also began noticing the moments when he seemed distant, staring at the horizon with a faraway look in his eyes. One afternoon, while they were tending to the horses, Clara finally asked, "Jake, what's on your mind sometimes?" The times you look so far away. Jake hesitated, then sighed, brushing his hand across the back of his neck. I don't know if I can explain it, he said. I just think about life, about things I need to do, things I want to do, and sometimes about mistakes I've made. Clara nodded slowly. I get that. I think everyone has moments like that, but maybe sometimes you worry too much about things you can't control. Jake looked at her, considering her words. Maybe, he admitted, but it's hard not to. When you're responsible for so much, for people and animals, for land that matters, it's easy to get caught up in it all. Clara smiled gently. I think you're doing a good job, and maybe it's okay to let yourself rest, too. Even cowboys need a break sometimes. He looked at her, a small laugh escaping him. I guess you're right. Their conversations gradually grew deeper, moving beyond small talk or teasing. They spoke of childhood memories, hopes for the future, and the little dreams that they rarely shared with anyone else. Clara told stories of her city life, the chaos and noise that had once consumed her, and how she had felt trapped despite being surrounded by people. Jake shared fragments of his past, stories of growing up on the ranch, learning to care for the land and animals, and the responsibilities he had taken on from a young age. Through these exchanges, they found understanding. Clara learned that Jake's quiet, wandering demeanor wasn't laziness or distraction. It was thoughtfulness, reflection, and a careful consideration of life. Jake realized that Clara's curiosity and openness were not intrusive but sincere, and he began to trust her with more of himself. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together near the edge of a field, the air cool and fragrant with the smell of grass and earth. Clara leaned back, arms behind her for support, and sighed. It's beautiful here, she said softly. Jake nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. It is. Some days I forget how lucky I am to be here. Clara glanced at him. You make it sound like it's hard being here too. Jake shook his head. It's not hard, just complicated. Life has its challenges even in a place like this. Clara smiled. I think that's true everywhere, but the challenges make it meaningful, don't they? Jake looked at her, considering her perspective. Maybe you're right, he said. Over the next few days, they began to spend more time together outside of work. Clara discovered a love for horseback riding, enjoying the feeling of wind in her hair and the rhythm of the horse beneath her. Jake guided her patiently, showing her how to handle the reins, keep balance, and communicate with the animals. They also explored the surrounding countryside together, walking through meadows, climbing gentle hills, and sitting on rocks to watch the sunset. These quiet moments became a kind of ritual, a time when words weren't necessary, and the companionship itself was enough. One afternoon, as they rested on a hill overlooking the fields, Clara spoke. Jake, do you ever think about what life could be like beyond here? Jake looked thoughtful. Sometimes, he admitted. But I like it here, it's home, it's familiar, and I don't know, it feels right. Clara nodded. I understand, but it's nice to dream too, right? Jake smiled faintly. Yeah, it is. It was during these moments that Clara realized how much she was learning from him. Not just about ranch life, but about patience, observation, and the quiet strength of a thoughtful person. And Jake, in turn, began to notice how Clara's presence brought lightness to his days. Her laughter, her curiosity, and her willingness to share in his world made him feel more connected, more alive, and less burdened by the weight he carried alone. One evening, after a long day of repairs and chores, they sat together on the porch of the barn, sipping water and watching the last rays of sunlight fade. Clara felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known in years, and she glanced at Jake, who was quietly observing the horizon. You've changed a lot since I met you, she said softly. Jake looked at her, surprised. Have I? Yes, she said. You're more relaxed, more present, you laugh more, you let yourself enjoy things. Jake considered her words, a faint smile on his lips. I suppose being around you has helped. You make things feel easier, lighter. Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. I'm glad, she said softly. From that moment their bond grew stronger. It wasn't about dramatic declarations or sudden revelations. It was quiet, steady, and real. They trusted each other, laughed together, shared burdens, and learned from one another. And in the wide, open countryside with its slow rhythms and endless skies, they were discovering that connection, true, meaningful connection, could grow slowly and beautifully without rush or pressure. As part 3 of their story came to a close, Clara and Jake both felt the subtle shift in their relationship. They were no longer just neighbors or casual acquaintances. They were companions, partners in the small, meaningful moments that made life worth living. And as they watched the sun dip below the hills, they both realized that this journey, this quiet, shared adventure, was only beginning. The days in the countryside continued in their steady rhythm, warm sunlight spilling over fields and barns, birds calling softly in the morning. Air and the scent of grass and soil filling every moment. Clara had grown increasingly comfortable in her new life. She understood the routines of the ranch, the needs of the animals, and the simple pleasures that came from hard work and quiet reflection. But more than that, she had grown closer to Jake, learning to understand the man behind the rugged exterior. Jake, too, had changed. He had begun to trust Clara in ways he had never trusted anyone before. Her presence seemed to ease the constant weight he carried, and her laughter became a quiet comfort in the long, demanding days. They had developed a rhythm together, each understanding the other's habits, moods, and silences. But life in the countryside was not without its challenges. One afternoon, as the sky darkened with clouds and the wind began to pick up, Clara noticed a tension in Jake's stance that she hadn't seen before. He was walking quickly toward the barn, his brow furrowed, and his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sense of urgency. "What's wrong?" she called, hurrying to keep up with him. Jake didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned toward the field where a few cows were scattered. One of them had gotten its leg caught in the fence, struggling desperately. Clara's heart sank as she saw the situation. The cow was panicking, twisting, and turning, and if it didn't get free soon, it could seriously injure itself. "Stay back," Jake said firmly, his voice steady despite the tension. "I need to get it out carefully." Clara nodded, watching as he moved quickly but calmly, assessing the situation. She had seen him work with animals before, but there was something different about this moment, something that made her realize just how much responsibility he carried every day. She wanted to help, but she also understood that rushing in could make things worse. Jake took a deep breath and approached the cow slowly, speaking in low, soothing tones. Clara could see the muscles in his arms tense as he worked to free the animal's leg without causing further harm. She held her breath, feeling the tension rise with every passing second. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jake managed to release the cow. It stumbled slightly, but then regained its footing and ran back toward the herd. He let out a long sigh, wiping sweat from his brow and running a hand through his hair. Clara approached him cautiously. "That was incredible," she said softly. "You kept calm the whole time." Jake shook his head, still catching his breath. "It's not about being incredible," he said quietly. "It's about responsibility. If I hadn't been careful, things could have been much worse." Clara nodded, understanding. She realized then that Jake's quiet demeanor, his distant expression, and his careful thoughtfulness were all part of a larger picture. He carried the weight of the land, the animals, and his community, and it had shaped him into the person she had come to admire. That evening, after the storm had passed and the sky cleared, they sat together near the pond, watching the reflection of the sunset on the water. Clara could see the exhaustion in Jake's face, but also a quiet pride in what he had accomplished. "You handled that so well," she said, her voice gentle. "I don't think I could have done what you did." Jake looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "You might be surprised," he said. "You've got more strength than you think." Clara felt a warmth in her chest at his words. She had come to admire his strength, but hearing him recognize hers made her feel valued, seen, and respected. Over the next few days, the incident with the cow seemed to shift something between them. Their bond deepened, not through words, but through shared experiences and unspoken understanding. Clara began to notice how attentive Jake had become, checking on her safety, offering guidance without pressure, and including her in tasks that required trust and cooperation. One morning, they were walking along a narrow path that wound through a dense part of the field. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of blooming wildflowers, and the sun filtered through the leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground. Clara carried a small basket of tools, while Jake led a young horse that had been nervous during training. "You know," Clara said, glancing at him, "I never thought I'd feel so connected to a place or to someone." Jake looked at her, eyebrows raised. "Connected? How do you mean?" "I mean, I feel like I belong here with the land and with you," she said, her voice soft but certain. Jake was quiet for a moment, taking in her words, then he nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. "I've felt the same way. Life can be lonely out here, but it's easier with someone who understands." They continued walking, the conversation settling into comfortable silence. Clara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had found a rhythm in the countryside, a sense of purpose, and a connection that went beyond words. But life, as always, had a way of testing even the strongest bonds. A few days later, a sudden challenge arose that would force both of them to confront their fears and work together in ways they hadn't imagined. A severe storm had rolled in overnight, with heavy rain, strong winds, and the threat of flooding. The small river near Jake's property had begun to rise, and Clara could see the worry etched on Jake's face as he assessed the situation. "We need to make sure the animals are safe," Jake said, his voice firm and decisive. "Move them to higher ground and check the fences before the water gets worse." Clara nodded, determination in her eyes. "Let's do it." They worked tirelessly, moving cattle and horses to safer areas, securing gates and fences, and ensuring that the smaller animals were protected. The rain soaked them to the bone, and the wind made it difficult to hear each other, but they communicated through gestures, shared glances, and unspoken understanding. At one point, a young horse panicked and tried to bolt, slipping near the muddy riverbank. Jake moved quickly, calming the animal with gentle words and steady hands. Clara assisted, guiding the horse back to safety. Together, they managed to secure all the animals, exhausted but relieved. As they stood soaked and muddy watching the storm pass, Clara felt a deep admiration for Jake. She had seen him handle challenges before, but this was different. The stakes were higher, the pressure immense, yet he remained calm, patient, and focused. She realized that his quiet strength, thoughtfulness, and sense of responsibility were not just traits, they were the foundation of his character. Jake turned to her, a small smile breaking through the exhaustion. "You did well today," he said. "I couldn't have done it without you," Clara smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest. "We did it together," she said. The storm became a turning point in their relationship. They had faced a challenge that required trust, cooperation, and understanding, and they had emerged stronger. Clara realized that Jake's distant moments and thoughtful expressions were not signs of weakness or distraction. They were reflections of a man who cared deeply, thought carefully, and took responsibility for everything he valued. In the days that followed, their bond continued to grow. They shared quiet evenings, laughter, and stories of their pasts. Clara learned more about Jake's dreams, fears, and hopes, and he learned to trust her with his thoughts and emotions. Their companionship deepened, built on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the understanding that they could rely on each other in times of challenge. One evening, as they sat on the porch of the barn, watching the sun set over the plains, Clara spoke softly. "Jake, I think I understand you better now, not just what you do, but who you are." Jake looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "And what do you see?" he asked. "I see someone who cares," she said. "Someone strong, thoughtful, and quietly brave. Someone who carries a lot but still finds a way to make life better for others." Jake's eyes softened, and he nodded slowly. "I see that too," he said. "And I see someone who has brought light into my days, someone I trust, and someone I enjoy being around." Clara felt a sense of warmth and connection unlike anything she had experienced before. She realized that their bond had evolved into something deeper: trust, respect, and a quiet affection that didn't need words to be understood. As part 4 of their story drew to a close, Clara and Jake both felt the significance of what they had shared. The challenges they had faced, the storms they had weathered, and the quiet moments of understanding had created a foundation for a relationship that was strong, meaningful, and real. And in the wide, open countryside, where life moved slowly and deliberately, they had discovered that connection, trust, and shared experiences were the true measures of companionship. The storm had passed, leaving the countryside glistening under a clear, golden morning sun. The air smelled fresh, dampened by rain but sweetened with the scent of wildflowers and wet soil. Clara stepped outside her cabin, taking a deep breath as she watched the sunlight dance across the fields. It was a new day, calm and quiet, but filled with the promise of possibilities. Jake was already outside, inspecting the fences that had been damaged during the storm. His sleeves were rolled up, his jeans streaked with mud, and his hands worked skillfully, checking every post and hinge. Clara smiled to herself. Even after everything, he remained steady, focused, and calm. She had come to admire that strength, that patience, and the quiet dedication that seemed to define him. "Morning," Clara called out softly, carrying a small basket of food and water. Jake looked up, his expression softening as he saw her. "Morning," he replied, giving her a brief, tired smile. "You get some rest." Clara shook her head. "I thought I'd help. There's still work to do, and I can manage a few chores." Jake nodded, silently appreciating her offer. He knew she was capable, but there was something about her willingness to be present, to share the labor, that made his day easier and lighter. Together, they worked through the morning, repairing fences, checking gates, and feeding the animals. The tasks were ordinary, mundane even, but Clara felt a quiet joy in completing them alongside Jake. Each movement, each gesture, seemed meaningful when shared. There was laughter over small mistakes, quiet understanding when tasks became difficult, and a sense of teamwork that went beyond words. After the chores were done, they rested near the edge of the pond, their backs against a large rock, watching the sun reflect on the water. Clara opened the small basket she had brought and offered him some bread and cheese. "You've been working hard," she said, her tone soft. "You deserve a break." Jake accepted the food with a small smile. "Thanks," he said. "It's nice to have someone here." "Makes everything easier." Clara looked at him thoughtfully. "You've always been strong, Jake, but you don't have to carry everything alone, not anymore." He met her gaze, and for the first time there was no teasing, no awkwardness, just honesty and trust. "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm grateful for you." The simplicity of their moment together reflected the depth of their bond. They had faced challenges, shared experiences, and discovered understanding in ways neither had expected. But Clara sensed that something had shifted now, beyond cooperation or friendship, something deeper, something quiet but undeniable. Over the following weeks, their lives settled into a comfortable rhythm. They continued to work together, laugh together, and share quiet moments that carried meaning beyond ordinary conversation. Clara discovered new ways to enjoy the countryside, learning to ride confidently, understanding the animals' behaviors, and even beginning to take on small projects around the barn on her own. Jake, in turn, began to rely on her judgment, trusting her decisions and valuing her perspective in ways he hadn't done with anyone else. One afternoon, they decided to explore a nearby hill that overlooked the valley. The walk was gentle but steep in places, and the landscape stretched endlessly before them. Clara felt a sense of freedom she hadn't known in years, the wind in her hair, the warmth of the sun on her back, and the feeling of being truly present in the moment. Jake walked beside her carrying a small satchel of supplies. "I like bringing you to places like this," he said quietly. "You notice things differently. You make me see the world in a new way." Clara smiled. "I could say the same about you," she replied. "You've taught me to be patient, to pay attention, and to appreciate the little things." When they reached the top of the hill, they paused to catch their breath and take in the view. The valley below was a patchwork of fields and meadows, dotted with grazing animals and lined with wooden fences. The sun was low, casting long shadows and bathing the landscape in a golden glow. Clara felt a sense of wonder and peace, knowing she had found a place where she could truly belong. Jake stood beside her, watching her face, and then he spoke softly. "Clara, I don't know how to say this exactly, but I'm glad you're here. You've made this place brighter." "Easier, better." Clara turned to him, her heart skipping a beat. "Jake, I feel the same way. You've helped me find a life I didn't even know I was looking for." They sat in silence for a while, letting the wind carry their words away, feeling the bond between them strengthen without needing further explanation. The unspoken connection was powerful, built on trust, shared experiences, and quiet understanding. As the days passed, Clara and Jake continued to build their lives together. They worked on the ranch, explored the countryside, and shared long evenings under the stars, talking about dreams, hopes, and memories. Each day, they learned more about each other, discovering layers of character, strength, and vulnerability that deepened their connection. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, they sat near the pond, watching the reflection of the sunset on the water. Clara glanced at Jake, noticing the softness in his expression, the quiet contentment that had begun to replace his usual distant gaze. "You know," she said softly, "I never expected to feel this connected, not to a place and certainly not to a person." Jake looked at her, a small smile forming. "I know what you mean," he said. "It's different, good different, not overwhelming or rushed, just real." Clara felt a warmth in her chest. "Yes, real, that's exactly it." From that moment on, they no longer needed to explain their feelings in words. Their bond was evident in the way they worked together, laughed together, and shared quiet moments. It was in the gentle gestures, the shared glances, and the sense of safety they provided each other. Clara realized that this connection, built slowly, patiently, and sincerely, was stronger than any sudden romance or dramatic declaration. The turning point of their relationship came unexpectedly. One morning, a neighbor approached Jake with news that a nearby barn had suffered damage from a fallen tree during the recent storm. The situation required immediate attention, and Jake knew he couldn't handle it alone. He turned to Clara. "Will you come with me?" he asked. "I could really use your help," Clara nodded without hesitation. "Of course." They spent the day traveling to the neighboring property, assessing the damage, and working together to repair the structure. Their cooperation was seamless, built on trust, experience, and a mutual understanding of each other's abilities. The physical labor was demanding, but they encouraged one another, shared laughs, and celebrated small successes as they worked. By the end of the day, the barn was stable, and the neighbors were grateful. Clara and Jake returned home tired but fulfilled, their bond strengthened by the shared experience. They sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip below the hills, feeling a quiet pride in what they had accomplished together. As the sky darkened, Clara spoke softly. "You know, Jake, I think I've finally understood something. Life isn't about rushing or forcing connections. It's about finding someone who understands you, who shares the journey, and who makes ordinary days feel extraordinary." Jake looked at her, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "Clara, I think I've found that too, with you." The sincerity in his voice, the depth of his words, and the honesty in his gaze left Clara feeling a sense of peace she had never known. She realized that their journey, from strangers to companions, had led them to this moment, a moment of trust, understanding, and quiet love. In the following weeks, Clara and Jake continued to build their lives together. They shared chores, laughter, stories, and quiet moments of reflection. They explored the countryside, tended to the animals, and celebrated small victories and milestones together. Each day they discovered more about each other, and their bond deepened, rooted in respect, trust, and shared experiences. One late afternoon, as the sun cast a warm glow over the fields, Clara and Jake stood together on the porch of the barn, watching the animals graze peacefully. Clara took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment and belonging. "You know," she said softly, "I never imagined life could be this simple and meaningful, but with you it feels perfect." Jake looked at her, his expression gentle and full of affection. "I feel the same," he said. "Life is better with you here. I don't want to imagine it any other way." Clara smiled, feeling a sense of fulfillment and joy. She had found a life that mattered, a connection that was real, and a companion who shared her values, dreams, and experiences. And Jake, too, had found someone who understood him, appreciated him, and brought light to his days. As the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara and Jake sat together in silence, feeling the strength of their bond. They had faced challenges, shared experiences, and discovered understanding in ways neither had expected. Their journey had not been dramatic or rushed, but it had led them to something real, meaningful, and enduring. Clara rested her head on Jake's shoulder, feeling the warmth and steady presence beside her. "I think this is home," she whispered. Jake wrapped an arm around her, holding her close. "Yes," he said softly, "home, and we'll face whatever comes next together." In the wide, open countryside, where life moved slowly and deliberately, Clara and Jake had discovered the true meaning of companionship, trust, and love. Their journey had been one of growth, understanding, and shared experiences, and it had led them to a place where they could truly belong. And as the stars began to twinkle above, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, stronger together than apart.